Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Timmins. I'm Director of Building Technologies at BEAMA. We represent manufacturers of low carbon electrical infrastructure technologies. We've got a panel for very knowledgeable people today, and the focus for today is to talk about social housing in the context of the huge challenges we face to get all housing to net zero by 2050. We're definitely going to aim to include questions from the audience, so if you can get involved via the Q&A button at the bottom, that would be great, and we'll try and have plenty of time for questions at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to start by going around each of our panelists with a short introduction and a first question for each of them. I'm going to start with Andy Mace, who's Director at Arup, a specialist in sustainability, carbon and climate change. And Andy, what are the main challenges for making social housing low carbon?
Colin, hi, thank you. Yes, good and very big question. I'm going to answer under a number of headings, really, and try and keep it quite short because I'm sure this will open up. I mean, technically there are challenges. You know, getting both for existing homes and sort of homes that are recently built or are being built now. I think there are technical challenges. You know, getting from lower levels of EPC ratings up to the kind of levels we need. You know, not just from an energy efficiency perspective, but certainly for net zero. Big technical challenges there. And even the new homes that are sort of emerging now, we're kind of building homes that will still need an element of retrofit, you know, into the future. So thinking about how we're designing the homes now from how we sort of make them retrofit ready, if you will, you know, for ease of changing technology into the future is important. So a range of technical things, I'm sure we'll get into that. And the ability to influence those sort of decisions for social housing providers, I think, you know, can be challenging, particularly if they're sort of buying Section 106, you know, stock. Commercially, of course, the costs issue is a challenge. You know, who pays, who benefits, how are costs transferred over potentially over time to customers. A lot of people-based issues, of course. You know, we have, you know, despite what I've said about the technical challenges, we have a lot of the technical answers, and we've got experts today on the panel. You know, bringing those approaches and technical responses forward. But we need to bring people with us. You know, for us in you know, the work in this environment, we're used to the jargon and, you know, and the tech, and it's sort of in our day jobs, but bringing people with us is key. Retrofitting homes is a very personal and intrusive, you know, raw thing to do. So you know, people understanding the benefits of it and where they will be at the end of it, I think, is really important. Finally, and then I'll move on to the next one. Integration, I think, is key. There are so many aspects to this complex problem, and so much work being done. Everything from sort of local area energy planning at regional scale, looking at, you know, how you develop programs of retrofit projects, all the way down to the detail of the tech in individual homes, and, you know, and everything in between. So there is so much good work happening, but I think equally a massive need for integration across those things into supply chains to get, you know, to get the oomph that we need behind what is a national infrastructure need to get our homes retrofitted.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'm sure we'll pick up on a lot of those points as much as we can. So moving on to Tim Sharpe, who's Head of Architecture at the University of Strathclyde, and has expertise in health and indoor air quality in housing. And Tim, just sort of following on from that, do you think that social housing retrofits look enough at the health and well-being of the occupants?
No, no, I don't. I mean, clearly it's not. I mean, there are a number of challenges here. The most significant sort of immediate one is that a lot of retrofit focuses on single issues. It's not a holistic approach. So there has been, and quite rightly, a big focus on energy and reducing energy in buildings. You know, it's a lot of schemes, you know, draft proofing, overcladding, double glazing, things like that are very good from an energy perspective, but are quite poor from a from an air quality perspective, for example. So you've got these really difficult challenges. It's made more challenging because your basic substructure, your existing buildings are probably quite poor to begin with. They've probably already had some problems of damp and mold in the past. You're locking some of those kind of things in. There's very good evidence that if we continue to retrofit the way we're retrofitting, we will actually make conditions worse in buildings. We'll make buildings more unhealthy and increase health issues. Therefore, it's very important, to take that holistic kind of view. I mean, there are some initiatives here. So there's things like PAS 2035, recently introduced last year, which tries to look at the building from a whole building perspective. National Energy Foundation have just introduced their super home standard. There are other similar things happening, which again are trying to sort of see the problem in the round and look at the whole problem. It's a real challenge. I mean, it's obviously difficult, particularly for landlords, because they have really limited capital budgets. They are often constrained by their financial years. So by the time you've planned and organized something, you can't get it done in that year. There are other challenges as well. I mean, we're involved in a project at the moment which is trying to do a retrofit of a stone tenement in Glasgow to Passive House standards. And just the difficulties we're having negotiating between building control, energy, and planning. All of who want slightly different things. I mean, these are real kind of roadblocks in the way of doing that. So yeah, I mean, in short, I don't think we're looking enough at health. It's clearly a big issue. It certainly has been in the last year. This is not an argument by any stretch of the imagination to say we shouldn't be doing energy retrofitting. We absolutely should, but we should be really careful not to build in unintended consequences.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Chris Jones. Chris is a co-founder of HomeLINK, responsible for product development, marketing and sales. Question for you, Chris, is how much of a role can better connectivity and smart devices play in social housing retrofit?
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I mean, I think that those things, it's the kind of forefront of technology, and I think technology, can always sort of help in different applications. I think looking at those two things, separate connect devices, obviously they go hand in hand. They're going to play an increasingly important role in, I think, both society and social housing. IT has been rapidly growing across many sectors, including office buildings, schools, hospitals, and of course homes. Accelerated by COVID, increasingly devices becoming sort of more efficient and more cost effective as well, which makes it quite relevant to this sector. Connectivity is already good enough, to be honest, for a lot of applications. So via GSM, SIM card gateways, low data rate applications are sort of cost effective and viable. Obviously, with improvements in connectivity in the future, so when LoRaWAN's more widely rolled out, more ubiquitous, that's going to again lower the cost of connectivity and make even more use cases available. And then with things like 5G becoming more prevalent, higher bandwidth applications will become more applicable as well. So things like using really clever algorithms to sort of monitor water flow to understand potential exact locations of leaks and things like that. So there's a sort of we're at this point right now where things like environment sensors, temperature, humidity sensors, things like that, connected smoke alarms are making a big difference. There's already 7,000. ACO's already got 7,000 connected social homes with smoke alarms. So that's already happening. But these more kind of complex technologies are also coming down the road as well. Again, these higher ROI compliance-based applications is what we're seeing quite a big growth in. We used to do a lot of different IoT integration pilots. So we'd be asked for things like smart locks and a whole host of different technologies. What we're seeing growing quite quickly are really environment sensors, being one of the primary ones relevant to sort of retrofit really. And for us, what we're able to do with that, for example, taking temperature data points throughout a property, you can estimate its thermal efficiency, so you can see which properties might benefit the most from a particular retrofit, or which retrofit solutions might be the most impactful if you can sort of monitor different retrofits that have happened. And you can also start to understand, quite often when you retrofit a building, not any building is the same. So quite often over time you can have unintended consequences like poorer air quality. And again, these sensors help kind of identify risks and help mitigate against those as well.
Okay, thank you. And final panelist is Ian Hutchcroft from Energiesprong. Ian's a director at Energiesprong, and I understand part of the team adapting this Dutch developed approach for the UK market. So I guess the key question, Ian, is what exactly is Energiesprong, and what can it bring to the party?
Hi, Colin, and hi, everyone. So Energiesprong is the Dutch government's approach. It's their strategy for delivering zero carbon housing across their whole housing stock. They started developing this strategy back in 2010, and they did quite a bit of trial and error. And by 2015, they had an approach that was working, and it is now working at scale with an industry in the Netherlands growing behind it, doing as much of the work off-site as possible. So our mission as Energiesprong UK, and we are mission driven, we're 100% publicly funded by UK government, the EU and local government in the UK. Our mission is to adapt that experience and grow a volume market for delivering zero carbon retrofit in the UK using this approach. And the approach is quite a simple one, actually, as many successful things are. It actually addresses complicated problems through quite a straightforward, logical approach. So, the challenge of cost, how do we get the cost down of delivering retrofit? Well, do as much as you can in a factory and build an industry of factories that are building components by aggregating demand in a long-term approach. So how do you finance retrofit? Well, you use the savings that a zero carbon retrofit delivers, both to the building owner in terms of maintenance savings, but also to the resident in terms of energy bill savings. You use those savings to finance the upfront capital cost of doing the work. And it's guaranteed performance from the companies that deliver the retrofit that unlock that finance from those guaranteed savings. Then how do you deal with the issue of demand? That do people really want this stuff in their homes? Well, you make it look great. You play into the home makeover market, the market that is addressed on TV programs every night of the week. People want to have their homes looking great, feeling great. Play into that market. How do we deliver at scale? 27 million homes in a decade or two? Well, again, industrialize. Start with the end in mind. Grow a volume market and grow it year on year, and bring an industry with you on timescales that they can invest over to grow that industrial capacity. And then how do you address the performance challenge, the performance gap? Well, make the solution provider responsible for actual, real, monitored performance. Have that as a requirement, and require a contractor in a design, build, monitor, and long-term performance guarantee contract to be responsible for that performance that they guarantee. And if it doesn't perform, they're on the hook for any additional costs above and beyond. And in essence, that is the Energiesprong approach. We've been at it a few years now in the UK. The first project was in Nottingham in 2018. Now there are 13 UK social landlords delivering with the Energiesprong approach. And there's over 2,500 homes that are contracted and being delivered by a range of UK-based solution providers in the UK. And we are continuing to grow that market year on year, and we intend to do so.
Thanks, Ian. Just making some notes there as we went along. I think everyone mentioned cost. So let's start there, really. And just starting with you, Ian. You obviously mentioned about how you can, unlock funding streams in there. From a social landlord's perspective, how can they actually unlock funding to actually do the work?
So one part of the approach, well, I mentioned the guarantee, didn't I? So first of all, you're spending a lot of money retrofitting your properties to zero carbon. Well, in return for that high capital cost, or relatively high capital cost, get your solution provider to guarantee its performance, to guarantee that you're going to save money on your long-term maintenance costs, and to guarantee that the resident will save long-term on their energy bills. If you have a big gap between energy bill before and energy bill after, that saving there can be shared between the resident and the landlord. And so the Energiesprong approach works by the resident paying the landlord a comfort plan charge, in return for which they get a guarantee that their bill will be total bill, energy import plus comfort plan charge to the landlord will be lower than what they were paying before. And they also get guaranteed comfort every day of the year, every year, with enough hot water, enough warm rooms, 21 degrees C for that affordable price, and healthy house air quality and rooms as well, addressing the real issues around health and indoor quality that Tim mentioned as well. So that's part of the mechanism of how you can finance the costs, and getting costs down to make that finance mechanism work without any government grants in the future. It's all about aggregating demand. Let's not do short-term pilot projects anymore. We know what the end is. The end has to be zero carbon homes. So let's start with that end in mind. Let's get a group of landlords who are up for this journey, get them pioneering. And I said we've got 13 on board already, and that's growing. And aggregate that demand, go out to the market in an aggregated way. In that way, solution providers can see that the market for net zero is real, that it's a market that they can invest in industrialization, and increasing the productivity of the construction industry through off-site approaches, through industrialization, is the key to getting the costs down in the long term.
Thanks, Ian. And Tim, I mean, you also mentioned cost in the context of health, and it's one thing we're very aware of, that, you know, when buildings get insulated, they increase the air tightness, but adding ventilation seems more of a burden than an opportunity there. So how do we overcome those sort of very practical problems?
Yeah, which is an interesting problem, because, you know, the cost of ventilation is not particularly great in comparison to the cost of sort of a lot of fabric measures. Certainly in comparison to the cost of a lot of kind of heating systems and things like that. I mean, one of the things to be aware of to flag is what the liability cost may be of getting this wrong. So if we have situations where, you know, the retrofit has made things worse, is causing increased health problems, increased, you know, mold and dampness, which we're seeing quite a lot, and regularly in buildings which have got, you know, cavity wall and external insulation, which has not been done well, which has led to increases in dampness and thermal bridging and thermal bypass and so on. So these things will come at a significant cost for rectification. So it's important to think about that whole life cost. I mean, it is an investment. I mean, I understand this is challenging for you know, certainly for housing associations with limited budgets, but trying to sort of future-proof it, I think is you know, should be seen as a whole life cost, a whole life investment. You know, there are these risks of getting it wrong. You know, that thing Ian mentioned, sort of trial and error. The trouble is, when we have errors, people are living in those errors, and that comes at a significant cost.
And you know, just to follow up on that, because you talk about awareness, I mean, do you think people are aware enough of the cost of things going wrong?
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, you know, it will happen at scale. That's the thing. I mean, a lot of retrofit up until now has been very small and kind of very piecemeal. What you can see is that we are having to accelerate that program to meet what are now, you know, pretty immediate sort of challenges and targets. So it's important to kind of get it right at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a question in the chat, isn't there? So local authorities don't have any money to put things right. Absolutely, you don't. You don't have any money to pay for any of this. So let's stop spending small amounts of money on small projects that don't deliver good outcomes. Let's stop that. And let's start thinking strategically. Start with the end in mind. How can we deliver something that is affordable, that is financeable, that doesn't break the social landlord's budget, that actually finances the work, so that net zero retrofit can pay for itself, can cost the landlord long term nothing. That's what we have to aim for. At the moment, the cost of delivering zero carbon retrofit is a little bit beyond where the business case will pay for the works of the long term work. However, we have a great positive, and that's the government's social housing decarbonisation fund.
Yeah.
there's going to be £3 billion available over the next 3 years from that government fund to do this job. And it's really important that we use that money strategically, that we don't blow it on work that creates problems, that doesn't actually deliver zero carbon actually in performance. We need to use that money to match a business case that finances off energy bill and maintenance savings long term, and use that with the government to build this volume approach and this neighbourhood by neighbourhood approach, and this approach that builds a new industry that can do this in the UK using industrialised approaches to both fabric and to energy systems.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And I suppose there is a key point out of that, that if local authorities can't afford to put things right, then you want to get it right in the first place and not have to come back to it. So
Exactly.
just picking up on one thing that came out there for Chris, really. I mean, in terms of the risk really of new technologies, or the perceived risk from new technologies and the cost of things going wrong, how can we sort of overcome that with some of the smarter technologies?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously very, very ambitious targets, and hopefully as a country will be ferociously moving towards net zero. There is going to be lessons learned, and one of the challenges of moving that fast is you're going to be scaling things very quickly, scaling new things very quickly, and therefore you can get some issue potentially with having to learn these these lessons quickly, or as Tim was pointing out, that you end up having quite big costs down the road when you realize that your ventilation is inadequate, or your houses are become more and more in disrepair. So there are a number of risks, associated with retrofit, and stuff that we're seeing, and I alluded to it earlier on, is by having this, and what we're scaling at the moment with some landlords, is using sensors to understand the impact that retrofit's had, both positive and negative. So has it had the positive impact of the thing, and compared to different things that they've done, what are the impacts there, versus once those retrofits have happened, has there been any negative implications in terms of ventilation, or even things like has the resident not understood how to use the new heat pump, and actually they're just living in a very unhealthy cold environment, and they wouldn't have rang up the landlord to complain because they didn't know how to use it, or what, or if that was normal, what's happening with their heat pump. And again, we've been able to see that these sorts of things have been flagged. There's obviously a number of other risks when scaling these different technologies associated to things like ethics maybe, and cybersecurity. And I think that a lot of the kind of technology that's available now is the kind of the sexy part of it's done, the kind of ML and everything's it's out there, it's working, it's proven, the business case is there, and it's a lot of the kind of less fun stuff that is in the way of sort of massive scale, and that's stuff that we've been looking at very closely. So doing a lot of work with residents, making sure this technology benefits both the residents and the landlord at all times, and it's not just kind of turns into a kind of big brother situation. And then on the cybersecurity side, making sure you follow all of the standards, which are quite can be very very difficult to do. But again, if you move too fast and don't do these what would seem like relatively boring steps, you might end up with millions of pounds worth of equipment or action, and realize that actually you need to go back and replace things, or do things slightly differently. And I think there's lessons that need to be learned as an industry to move quickly, making sure communication between landlords and doing lots of things like this to sort of make sure that when lessons are learned, they're shared quickly, so similar mistakes aren't made.
Thank you. And Andy, I mean, a sort of similar question for you, really. I mean, just in terms of general low carbon technologies, I mean, how do we make sure that we lessen the risk of things that are still seen as cutting edge, even though they've been around a long time?
Yeah, Colin, thanks. Interesting. I'm going to do a shameless plug actually for a national retrofit research project that we're working on at the moment. So, the diversity of the property types we have across the UK, both in age, and type, is huge. And picking up, I think, on Tim's point and the challenges he was mentioning of the tenement in Glasgow. So we're working currently in the northeast of England on a retrofit research project, which is building 11 properties of different periods, getting them as close as we can in terms of materials and design of how they were built, when they were built, from 1900 through to just sort of turn of the century, around 2000. So 1970s flats, some sort of turn of the century 1900 terrace buildings, and it's to do exactly what the guys are talking about, research all of those different aspects. How does the technology sort of respond? How does the insulation work? How does the ventilation systems interface with monitoring of environmental conditions, etc. So hopefully, over the next few years, it will be built quite soon, and then there will be a research program to publicize the results from that kind of work that should help, because I think as much the more we can get that sort of knowledge out in the public domain for people to learn from, I think the better. So hopefully that will help. I wanted to pick up on one of the questions as well, if I may, the sort of the point around data that Jay has raised. I completely agree. I would say it's sort of data commensurate with the level of sort of analysis or planning that you're doing at the time. So for the last 2 years, we've been working in Scotland. There is a fantastic data set in Scotland that actually is available in England, but I fear it's little known about, called the Home Analytics data set. It's looked after in Scotland by the Energy Savings Trust. And it's a great resource, down to individual building level. The levels of confidence in the data, I think, is subject to some interrogation, but nevertheless, it gives a very granular data set, which is really useful in sort of citywide or sort of neighbourhood planning, when you're seeking to identify the homes where energy efficiency might be a component of fuel poverty, where single glazing is prevalent, where low levels of insulation are prevalent, etc. So at a granular level, you can start to use that data set to look over broad areas, spatially, to start planning either area-based programs or sort of tenancy type, based programs where you want to address a particular group. And we're finding that really useful. Of course, when you get down to the sort of detailed design, and for Ian, the actual design of the house by house, particularly when you're then seeking to manufacture that off-site and bring it to site, then of course you're down to the really granular level of data. But it's out there. We do have challenges around data sharing agreements and all those things, those kind of things. And again, we've been doing work on that recently with the Scottish Government to identify ways of getting the data shared more easily, so it can inform design of programs of retrofit. So it's being worked on, and it's kind of coming. Would be my response.
And there was a question, I think, for you there about the name of the project in the northeast.
Yes, so it's being run by by Northern Gas Networks. It's called the Customer Energy Village, and it's on a site called Integral. It's a research station for Northern Gas Networks in Gateshead. Integral, spelt INTEGREL. It's a wacky acronym with higher and lowercase letters. But so we've just finished design, sort of going into tendering for contractor now. So
okay, and just staying with you, Andy, I mean, just on the sort of macro scale, do you think there is enough happening in social housing to hit net zero targets?
Like I said, my recent experience over the last couple of years has been in Scotland. So is enough happening? There's a lot happening. Is it happening fast enough? I guess is the question. As Ian said, 28 million homes. I'd seen 29 in the Commission on Climate Change's report. Let's not quibble over a couple of million, but that's tens of thousands of retrofits per week between now and 2050. So and we're already behind because we're in 2021. So it's the speed of starting to get this done, and all those things Ian said about getting the industry ramped up and working at scale. I completely agree. That's where we need to light some fires. So the 3 billion fund is great, but that integration of bringing all of these threads together to get that impetus is really important, I think, and that's still missing a bit for me. Is my observation.
Thanks, Andy. And I know Ian had raised earlier with me that there's an issue around electrification and heat pumps. Do you want to just pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. I think let's be clear. Let's be really clear. Heat pumps have got to be part of the future. Fossil gas is going and has to go as soon as possible. Hydrogen isn't going to go down to houses. It's got to be electrification of heat. Therefore, it's got to be heat pumps. To get heat pumps to work effectively and affordably, we need to get the thermal performance down a lot, down below 80 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. Now, EPCC is not a measure of thermal performance. A property can be 150 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year and still be EPCC. And the government or the government strategy perhaps leads us to believe currently that if you hit EPCC, you can put a heat pump in. Well, you can't. You need to focus on the thermal efficiency element. You need to do fabric improvement together with a heat pump. And I would say the business model will always drive you to put PV and storage in there because it's the most cost-effective way of generating and consuming electricity that's ever been invented to date. So PV integrated with thermal performance, advanced thermal performance, and I don't think EWI cuts it in its traditional form as it is now, because we can't deliver it in the numbers and at the scale and to the quality and the air tightness and everything that goes with it that we need. We need to industrialize the production of factory-made panels that can deliver fabric improvement with triple glazed windows and doors already built into them. So we need, what I'm saying is we need a whole house approach, but we need to be really clear about what the parameters are that are needed to drive that whole house approach. And it's affordability, and that's what drives including the PV, and it's low thermal performance, which unlocks the possibility of installing heat pumps and replacing gas boilers with heat pumps in an affordable way, affordable to the resident. And that's obviously, essential to getting this job done.
Thanks. And there's a question just come up from the audience, which I think is relevant there, about we need guidance on what a carbon zero house looks like. We know the retrofit sometimes doesn't improve the EPC or SAP ratings and want to make sure money's spent in the right way. I just wondered, Tim, where would people go for that sort of guidance?
Yeah, this is a real challenge, actually. I mean, some of the policy mechanisms like SAP are really blunt tools. And one of the problems about SAP, I put it in the reply, is that it's not a predictive tool. It's a comparative tool at a design stage, so it's rather theoretical. So you probably need better tools. I mean, that's why things like the calculation methodologies using Energiesprong in Passive House PHBP are actually much better mechanisms to do your calculations. They do it more thoroughly. They're based on better physics, and they do give you a much closer degree of prediction. I mean, it's one of the sort of slightly unfortunate things that we're basing so much stuff around SAP at the moment. And we really, and even energy performance certificates, again, they're theoretical. We should be really focusing more on display energy certificates in terms of what we're actually achieving for that. It's a difficult challenge, but I mean, it's like all these things. If you're trying to do something which is more challenging, then you need to put more effort in at the beginning. The traditional kind of construction methodology of build them cheap, pile them high doesn't work in this regard. It needs to be a more carefully designed and considered thing. And it's one of the challenges that the construction industry has, because it has worked traditionally on a trial and error approach over many years. That's fine. But when we're trying to innovate at scale and at pace, you need to put more effort into design and analysis at early stages in order to ensure what you are planning is right. So, I think one of the messages there is that when you are appointing consultants, when you're sort of commissioning design teams, you need to make sure that they've got those deep specialist skills in order to be able to do this type of stuff.
Okay, thanks.
And I'd echo that.
Sorry.
I think there's a lot of good stuff that Tim has just said there, but in terms of what it looks like, what does net zero look like? Well, it has to look great. The aesthetics have to be good on the outside. And what it looks like technically, we think specifying an outcome of net zero energy is really, really helpful. And what I mean by that is that over the course of a year, the property produces as much electricity as it consumes for everything, no gas. And the great benefit of that is it's really easy to measure. And what it also does, if you specify that outcome, your solution provider, your contractor that you're making responsible for the design and manufacture and install of the system, it really drives them to absolutely max out the thermal performance of the property. That's the most cost-effective way of meeting net zero. It also drives them to max out the PV generation and the storage, either thermal or electric or both, to make sure that the property uses as much of that and imports as little as that. And that's a core element of the Energiesprong performance specification. And it really works. It's quite simple and it really works. It works in terms of delivering an ambitious design that can be implemented and is being implemented by solution providers. And what's more, those solution providers are happy to guarantee the actual real life performance of that over a long term, over a decade or more.
Mm-hmm. And there is a specific question on Energiesprong. Sorry, I certainly didn't pronounce it right in the first place. I don't think I got close to it there either. Does it have a target heat demand and air tightness figures to achieve, or is it a percentage reduction depending on the building?
Included in the outcome-based performance specification is a thermal performance. It has to be, our target is 30, below 30 kilowatt hours per meter square, a little bit higher than Passive House. The reason for that is that we've just worked this through with the industry, and it just gives a little bit of flex, and it takes away a little bit of the risk, and it unlocks the long-term guarantee of performance. Air tightness we don't actually specify, but what we require is that when the solution providers designed a solution to meet the outcomes for a property, they have to say what their air tightness level that they have to achieve to meet that outcome-based performance spec is, and they have to measure that. They have to show the client that they've met their design for air tightness figure, but we don't actually specify what that figure is. As long as they meet the net zero, and as long as they meet that thermal performance, and as well as they meet the air quality requirements, no more mold and damp, then they've got a little bit of flex. And this is all about just opening up the space. Passive House is great. Passive House has built a huge skill set in the UK industry, which is essential for this job. But what Passive House hasn't quite got the handle on is that integrated zero carbon delivered at scale. And what Energiesprong does, it just learns from Passive House a lot, adds a few things to it, and delivers a bit of flex to enable a solution provider to cost effectively deliver real zero carbon and to guarantee it as well.
But can I just pick up something just following that, because it's something you mentioned there, Ian. It's really important that we gather data on actual performance.
Oh, yeah.
It's really important that we evidence this. It has to do what it says on the tin, right? One of the things that, again, the construction industry has never done is routinely evaluate the performance of things that it produces. Any other sphere of industry, manufacturing, you design something, you test it before you put it out there. Construction industry, it's just out there. So gathering this data is really important to understand what's working, what works well. If it isn't working, why it isn't working, and what we need to do to kind of fix it. And a lot of the questions I'm seeing in the chat are about if we had better performance data, then we would have a much clearer idea of what is working and what isn't, and we would be able to kind of make much more informed decisions about this. So a lot of these things, so Passive House, Energiesprong, Super Homes, past 2035, they are now all mandating the collection of data from homes. Certainly energy data, perhaps environmental data as well, in order that we have a really clear evidence basis of what's working.
Absolutely, Tim. I couldn't agree more. And it's a requirement of the Energiesprong approach that every property has a monitoring system installed that reports against every single one of the performance outcomes, including health and energy and thermal performance, of course. And that is operation every day, every year for 10 to 30 years. And it's that actual real world performance which verifies that the guarantee that the solution provider is providing the landlord is actually being met. And that ultimately is what drives quality in the industry. Because if a solution provider knows that they're on the hook for underperformance, they're going to make sure that it does perform. And that's a quality turnaround that we need in the industry, and we are seeing in the industry. It is being delivered real terms, and properties are actually performing, and there are businesses out there who want to get into this market on those terms.
So did you want to come in there, Andy?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say a little bit about just back to the net zero carbon thing. My sort of, again, experience and sense of this is that it's a combination of both the homes, and the energy efficiency, absolutely some local generation and storage if that works, but it's absolutely also about the energy supply network, what exists and what might be coming. Ian, I'm sorry, I don't think electrification is the whole answer. The ratio of heat required in the UK versus current electricity demand is vastly different, and it will be a hybrid of absolutely massively greater amounts of electrification and heat pumps where they're suitable. But we've also got billions of pounds of gas network assets in the ground, and the GDNOs are working very hard on how hydrogen and sort of non-fossil fuel gas can start to be blended into their gas network. So of course hydrogen is going to be fed into the hard to decarbonize industries, transport systems, etc. But we are working on projects, 300 home pilot. Again, I'm flying the flag for Scotland, but a 300 home hydrogen project in Scotland. Hydrogen house at the same Integral site, so there's a lot of work going on, and I do see hydrogen in pipes feeding over time. Most of the safety case work has been done on hydrogen in appliances. There will be appliances on show at COP26 in Glasgow later this year. So inevitably, I think it will be a hybrid solution, which is why this coming back to this integration thing, integrating retrofit programs and projects with the electricity and gas network operators' plans for where electrification of heat works, where networks can be reinforced to support electrification, is absolutely necessary. But also, there are places, I think, where we should absolutely be making the homes as energy efficient as we can and doing local generation, as you say. But hydrogen is coming, and there will be areas, in certain property types where higher temperatures are needed, etc., where I do think there will be hybrid approaches. So that integration of planning the retrofit at the building scale and planning what's happening in the energy networks and bringing those things together is really important.
I think we can argue about the scale will deliver, but I would argue that there's a lot of evidence to say that it's going to be really small. And the huge mistake would be to encourage social landlords and other building owners to sit back and think, I don't need to do anything because hydrogen is going to save the day, and it won't. We have to be massively ambitious around thermal Heat pumps
I
are
agree.
the solution for the vast majority of UK homes. Hydrogen won't get to them. It'll get to some places in the right area where it makes sense, but it won't go nationwide like fossil gas does today. You know, we need to be starting seriously with the end in mind of that massive decrease in thermal energy demand of the UK housing stock, and meeting the vast majority of the residual thermal demand through heat pumps and therefore electrification.
I think that's right.
One dimension of that, sorry, very briefly, one dimension of that is from an air quality perspective, trying to phase out open flame appliances in buildings. That's part of it. So there may be a place for certain use of hydrogen, perhaps in district heating system or CHP systems, for example. I think there will be a mix. Inevitably, there will need to be a mix. I mean, it's a bigger problem for kind of power networks. I mean, what's interesting is that there is other sort of research going on in terms of heat networks and things of that nature. So again, there are sort of kind of couple of questions about district heating, neighbourhood schemes. All these things have significant kind of value. One of the big problems is where we are dealing with houses on a house by house, or even a bit of a house by bit of a house basis, and that's incredibly fragmented.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite clear, isn't it, that improving the thermal performance of homes is the kind of core thing, and I suppose that's what this sort of panel is about in its title. But something that's quite often left out of the conversation with this is if you're relying on a home being very thermally efficient, it means that you're relying on a resident being more engaged with the management of their home's environment, both from a thermal point of view and from a ventilation point of view. And the reality is, whilst we kind of understand air quality and what causes damp and mold and the risks to health, and the NHS do, and there's lots of studies on that, and we know how these technologies work, the reality is most people don't know how they work. They don't know the impact on their health. And they don't really, and a lot of people don't even really care about climate change. So we're in this situation where you kind of need to change the whole culture, and everybody needs to be educated who live in the homes, because we talk a lot about funding from the government and what a landlord's going to do and what these all committees and organisations are going to do. But the reality is, it's the millions of people that live in those homes that need to make changes to actually achieve reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, which is what this basically is all about, and that requires a lot of education. And even now, people, we've seen from our pilots where we're monitoring the environmental conditions, people their air quality is really poor because they don't know anything about it or why it affects their health. They've got a lot of mold problems. They don't realize why there's mold issues there, and their homes are so warm, they're so hot that it actually it affects their health. So we've seen homes that are heated to like 35 degrees in the winter and things like this, and this has, according to the NHS, really negative impact on your health, and they're not even really aware that it would save them money, the climate, and their health if they just reduced it gradually over time, and they'd actually feel no different in terms of comfort. So there's some really quite basic things now, and it's going to be increasingly, there's going to be a reliance on people doing things differently, or being better educated, and that means culture change and a lot of other complexities there. But it's something that's quite often left out, I think.
Thank you. I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll try and get through some of these. One, I think, probably for Andy, really. Talking about retrofit work, and the tenants. I mean, what happens to the tenants during the retrofit?
Good question. I think it's a function of the sort of the scale of the retrofit. Certainly, in my experience, some of the area-based sort of programs, when they are quite intrusive, can require people to be sort of decanted. But I think it's a function of the level of retrofit. I mean, that becomes very challenging. So if people can stay in their homes, that's clearly an easier option. Whether Ian and Tim may have more experience of me of doing the Energiesprong at volume.
I think we have, again, I think we have to think with the end in mind. Are we really going to be able to decant 27 million people from their homes for a few months?
Yes.
No. So we have to design a solution that requires no decanting, and it's another driver for the off-site approach, for industrializing, for doing as much as possible in a factory, in a controlled environment where most of the labor is put in productively, and delivering that kit of parts to site and installing it with the resident in situ. And that's an absolute requirement of the Energiesprong approach. No decanting. There may be an hour or two, perhaps, with certain works, you know, where people need to leave their homes for a welfare area or something, but no decanting. You know, we need to do this with people in situ in their home. And ideally, we need to do this in a way that people leave their house in the morning to go to work or school, and when they come home in the evening, the house has been transformed, you know, done in a day. And I can show you a very nice video of how the Dutch have delivered that.
Thank you. And quite a specific question here, but about timber frame houses, so with external cladding systems being unsuitable for that. You know, is there a practical solution other than internal wall insulation? Or can we say no, according to our panelists? Anyone got any other alternatives to that?
Not in my experience. I've not worked on retrofit with timber frames. I'm just trying to. I don't think in the energy village we don't have timber framed homes there. I need to check. Possibly the sort of the late 1990s terraced.
Okay.
I think if you, my view is that for most archetypes in the UK, if you put the challenge out there to the market in the right way, i.e. don't say it's a pilot project that you're only going to ever do one of and never do any more again. If you say, well, if this timber frame archetype in the UK, there are X million of them, and we, the 10 undefined social landlords, own about 25% of them, a solution that does it all and that works for timber frame, I think you'd get a solution. It's not beyond the wit of man to make a woman to make a timber frame property very thermally efficient.
I mean, just one thing to add to that. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important in retrofit is to know what you're retrofitting. And so time and effort and intelligence determining what the actual fabric is prior to retrofit is a really useful thing to do. So doing thermography, measuring U values, stuff like that will actually give you, it'll tell you what your base level is, and it will tell you what the defects are. So for something like timber frame, it's probably got some insulation, but the problems may well be that it's slumped or there's bits missing and stuff like that. So there may well be stuff, if you know what you've got and you've got that data, then you may be able to kind of target, you know, those interventions much more effectively. You know, there is this, you know, slight danger that we tend to use a one-size-fits-all solution for these types of things. Again, it was sort of interesting with the project we're working on. When we actually measured the U values, they weren't the same as the calculated U values. Therefore, the amount of insulation we needed to upgrade it wasn't as great as we thought it might be, which is, you know, time and effort and money which you can spend elsewhere. You know, again, being smart about this stuff is really important.
And on a general level, I mean, are there enough people with the right skills out there in order to do the scale of retrofit that we need?
Not the old way, no. We need a new way that uses labour much more productively. Do it in a factory, don't do it on site. That's not productive at all, not scalable, not cost effective, and it doesn't deliver high enough quality. Let's recognise that. So
I think even with just the pace, yeah, I mean, even with just the pace that it's going to happen at, even if it was exactly the right types of skills, which it isn't, because there's a lot of new technologies and things that are happening. I think just the pace of it makes it difficult. You know, if you're going to increase the size of the market by 10 times over a few years, and it takes time based on a capitalist society for the labour to catch up with that. I think probably to meet those targets, there's going to need to be thought about training people, you know, mitigating against that to some extent, although you'll never, you know, quite be able to do that.
No, I mean, quite a lot of the problems I see in existing buildings which have been retrofitted is because it's been done badly. You know, it's poor workmanship, it's poor installation, you know, and it's the simplest of things. You know, I did a lot of work looking at ventilation systems. It's a hole in the wall in the fan. It really couldn't be any simpler. But it's amazing how often it gets stuffed up. So yeah, you know, we do need sort of better and simpler kind of mechanisms to do these types of things. Yeah, I mean that skills gap is really significant. I mean, what we are obviously seeing is the evolution of technology in order to kind of do stuff. So I mean, I've talked about things like thermography. You know, we've got cameras now which you can put on your iPhone, which, you know, 5 years ago were 15 grand. I mean, it's, you know, that type of thing. Things like LiDAR system for scanning you know, for scanning surfaces to get things which fit exactly, which can be factory made. All these things are now really, you know, they're not science fiction anymore.
And there is a question, I know this was mentioned, I think Andy mentioned it, about a neighbourhood scale approach for, I mean, it says for private householders, but obviously for social housing, it can be quite diverse as well. You know, is it possible to look at neighbourhood scale approaches?
I think it's really important to, it sort of goes to Ian's point, which I absolutely agree with, about the need for scale here. And to deliver at scale, you need to be sort of planning at scale, and then and everything that follows. So and to get the sort of economies of scale, and I say that not just in terms of the industry that, you know, could be created here, and dare I say, you know, avoiding hundreds of individual tradespeople all in their vans, you know, all doing house by house. That's my kind of circular economy nightmare. Whereas the alternative, because of the amount of waste that could be generated, you know, to landfill, and the materiality of what's required here in terms of insulation and double glazing and, you know, all the things that need to be done, the benefits of doing that in a coordinated way, you know, taking principles of circularity in off-site factories, as Ian said, you know, that is the goal for me, you know, in my head, of where we need to be nationally. And that absolutely needs the sort of neighbourhood approach. The alternative of a highly disparate house by house, you know, hundreds of individual trades, just makes me really nervous, even from a carbon emissions perspective, in terms of the embodied emissions in all of those materials and trips, you know, compared to doing it in a much more centralized sort of circular economy principled way.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm conscious of the time, and just as a sort of final question, really, I just want to go around the panel really and just ask what could government do to support social housing landlords that isn't happening right now? You know, what's the one biggest thing? Maybe if I start with you, Ian.
I think set a target. You know, I think EPC is not a meaningful target here. You know, set a target for zero carbon. That would really help. The reason that landlords are really coming on board at scale with the Energiesprong approach now is because their local politicians have declared climate emergency and set a zero carbon target for 2030 or 40 or whatever. It's because they have to. The housing associations appear to be lagging behind on the net zero retrofit agenda. It's because they don't have to, because nobody's made them to. If national governments set a really clear target and just said all the things that we know the old ways won't work to deliver the end that we have in mind, I think that would be the single biggest thing. They're already making finance available, already making funding available to help grow the journey. Let's use that most effectively. But I think setting a clear policy and target for everybody to respond to would be the biggest single thing that government could do.
Okay. Chris, what could government do for you? Well, not for you, but from your
in this particular context. Yeah, I mean, I guess the you know, as it's been mentioned, there's funding there. I think that if a portion of that obviously is allocated to you know, making sure things like you know, ventilation and everything else meets that you know, required standard. I think also you know, even just, you know, to taking a step back and thinking about the whole net zero concept and the idea of reducing energy, as I said before, that's something that could happen now, just with people being more aware and being more engaged with it. So some way of being able to, provide that information, or help change the big leadership challenge for them, rather than just setting aside a budget and a mandate, but actually starting to change the culture to make everyone aware of what they need to do, and start doing things now to achieve those targets, because it's certainly a lot of stuff that people could do now.
Thank you. And Andy, the same question to you.
Yeah, dare I say, I'm all for market forces, right? But dare I say, I do feel this needs some more centralized integration and coordination, because the funding mechanisms are disparate. There is still lack of sort of trust, I think, in not only products but workmanship. So there's a lot to do to sort of integrate this, coordinate it, get the funding happening in the right way, getting the targets set in the right way, getting the supply chains in place, maybe some kind of kite mark system that gives people confidence in everything from the products being used to the installation quality to the longer term monitoring. And that it just doesn't happen at scale in the coordinated way that we need. So I fear I'm saying out loud that we need some either national or regionalized sort of coordination of this to get the impetus that we need.
Okay. And finally to Tim, what do you think we need from government?
Yeah, and so I'd take Ian's point. I'd take it a step further. I think we need targets, but they need to be in-use targets. We need in-use performance standards, which need to be evidenced. There's the NABERS scheme in Australia, which requires certainly public buildings to perform at a certain level. Because that means that performance then becomes non-negotiable. We were having a conversation with the Housing Association about doing a building performance evaluation project on one of their developments, and then we're not sure about it, because they say, well, the trouble is, if we do that, it'll push the tender prices up, because the contractor will have to get it right, because that's a choice at the moment, getting it right or not. So we need to take that choice away. It's the equivalent of having moving away from intermittent speed cameras to average speed cameras. So you can't get away with it.
Okay, but thank you. I mean, normally at this stage in a seminar, I would ask for a round of applause for the speakers. I mean, feel free to clap at home, but nobody will be able to hear you. But I would say, from my perspective, thank you very much for the speakers. That's been really interesting. And I think for me, hopefully for all the audience, judging by the participation, I would guess it has. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. Sorry if we haven't got round to all of them. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.